This tactical overview is made possible by this video sponsor, War Thunder. World Conquest 132 hosted a battle that was one of the greatest displays of combined arms I've ever seen in Foxhole. So I interviewed many of the pilots, naval captains, and logistics personnel involved in the skirmish. And through the use of 3D graphics, I present a tactical overview of the entire battle. As part of the Warden faction's Western naval campaign, their forces steadily advanced to capture all but one of the colonial faction's island regions, Stema Landing. However, in the time it took for territories such as the Orebreaker Isles and Satyr's Stone to fall, Stema Landing had built up its defenses, most notably at Spearhead Island, the Colonials' last island airfield. From here, the Colonials would stage air raids into Fisherman's Row and Faranac Coast, with planes serviced by its well-known ground crew.
The lineup, dude!
Yeah, we
gotta
need
go.
that
Oh my
to
gosh, dude. That's crazy.
We gotta go faster!
Dude, that's so many. Holy. That's a lot of ships directly
Incoming! What?
Keep going, keep going!
Oh my god, go!
Fly! Fly, please, fly, please, fly!
Keep going! Fly!
On Spearhead Island, the Joe Regiment set up rows of concrete defensive garrisons, with trenches, barbed wire, anti-tank mines, tank traps, and naval mines lining its beaches. A trio of artillery batteries were stationed across the island, set up to cover each other's minimum ranges. They were coordinated by the spotter in the Joe Regiment's radar array, which, while usually used to detect incoming enemy aircraft, could visually observe the entire island, earning it the nickname of the Eye among Joe members. Additionally, anti-air defenses such as flak batteries peppered the island, greatly discouraging any enemy aircraft from approaching their shores. There were even a couple precariously placed on the mountain to the north, known as AC's Overlook. However, as the only resources available on the island were coal and raw scrap metal, nearly everything needed to be imported. Regiments such as Joe, Knight, Emporium, Steel, Cabal, CMRC, along with public logistics would bring in supplies from the mainland such as fuel, ammunition, building materials, and the raw resources necessary to stock facilities that produced supplies like aircraft ammunition on the island. Given the propensity of the Wardens to lay mines on colonial naval supply routes and intercept seaborne cargo, regiments such as Knight would bring in more valuable supplies via cargo plane when possible. However, this wasn't without its risks. Warden air patrols would occasionally shoot them down. While aircraft often maintained a presence on Spearhead Island, very few planes called it home, as the island's aircraft depot would often be struck by Warden naval bombardments, forcing many of them to set up their home base in the mainland, where they were scrambled to spearhead the moment the enemy arrived. It was also much safer and faster this way to form large groups of aircraft rather than leaving them parked in the open on Spearhead, or slowly assembling them from the hangar. But what if you could just skip all the logistics and just fly? Well, you can do that with this video's sponsor, War Thunder. War Thunder is a vehicle combat game where you can take command of a wide variety of over 2,500 tanks, ships, helicopters, and of course, planes from across history, hailing from 10 major nations. The immersive vehicles, graphics, and sound effects put you in command of vehicles from the armored cars and biplanes of the 20s to the fighter jets and main battle tanks of today. War Thunder's damage model isn't like most of those in gaming. Instead of a general pool of hit points, vehicles are modeled down to their individual components, which can be independently knocked out, including the crew. An impressive X-ray view is provided to give you accurate feedback on the damage you deal. With 3 distinct game modes that dial up or down the realism, players can decide how much of a realistic or arcadey experience they want to play. And with a new mobile version, it's never been easier to join over 95 million players in PvP combat in War Thunder today. War Thunder is available for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and mobile. You can sign up with the links in the description or pinned comment below to receive a massive bonus pack containing multiple premium vehicles along with other goodies for new and returning players that haven't played in the last 6 months on PC and consoles. Also included is an exclusive vehicle decorator, Eagle of Valor, 100,000 silver lions, and 7 days of premium account time. This offer is available for a limited time only. And also thanks to War Thunder, you won't be seeing a mid-roll ad on this video. Now, back to Stema landing. Groups invested in aircraft such as the Gambit Coalition would often fly sorties around Spearhead, given the island's predisposition to a heavy amount of air combat. In particular, the RAF regiment's fighters would often be seen in the area. While they were originally stationed in the east, after their exploits were seen, many of their fighter pilots were hired on as flying mercenaries by the logistics regiments occupying Spearhead Island, compensating them with free fighter planes to do their business on the island. These defenses and partnerships would prove to be crucial for the following weeks, where the Wardens launched a series of naval invasions, shore bombardments, paratrooper drops, and bombing runs in an effort to take the island. Stema landing would stand as a symbol of colonial defiance. However, come the evening of the 3rd of March, a massive combined arms force of Wardens would assemble, intending to claim the island. An operation involving a battleship, a pair of frigates, a Longhook landing ship, a swath of supporting vessels, 7 bombers, and squadrons of fighter aircraft would assemble for a simultaneous attack on Spearhead Island. The Warden plan would be as follows. First of all, any naval invasion at Spearhead would need to secure a beach, and currently, the beach was lined with concrete garrisons and defenses, which would mow down any advancing attackers. With the target being the western beach, these would be dealt with using a massive show of force. 7 bomber aircraft coordinating with a battleship. However, bomber aircraft could only take off from dry concrete airfields, which once destroyed would need to be rebuilt as a metal airfield and followed by the pouring of wet concrete, which would take a minimum of 48 hours to dry, weather permitting. In the meantime, all other aircraft could operate from the airfield. Ironically, airfields being durable, long, and straight structures would make them ideal targets for bomber aircraft. So naturally, Spearhead and its rival airfield at Dankana Post would both be subjected to bombing raids to destroy their concrete runways, with the Gambit Coalition bombing Dankana Post, and the Cows Regiment destroying the concrete airfield at Spearhead 6 hours before the Warden invasion operation was slated to begin. It should be noted that the state of Dankana Post's airfield wouldn't change the Warden's plans, as this many fighter and bomber aircraft would have likely created an absurd traffic jam at the runway. The fighter escort would take off from Dankana Post, and the Cows Regiment's bombers would launch from the Windburn airfield, with planned routes to conserve fuel for a return trip. This massive air wing was to arrive at the border to Stema landing at the exact same time as the invasion fleet, 2 frigates, a battleship, and a Longhook landing ship. However, they would not all cross into Stema landing at the same time. The Telephone Regiment's battleship and frigate, along with the fighter escort and 4 of the bombers, would cross into Stema landing first, to properly manage the maximum server population limits. The bombers were to completely wipe out the island's western concrete defenses, with the battleship following up on the strike and the frigate shelling the airstrip to stop any aircraft from taking off or landing. After the concrete walls were gone, The battleship was to leave the region and swap places with the Lambda Regiment's Longhook landing ship and its landing party to finally take Spearhead Island. At least, that was the plan. Spearhead's defenders would do their best to try and prevent it from succeeding. Preceding the battle, a colonial listening kit placed in the Warden's Dankana Post airfield tapped their map intelligence, leading to 9 Warden planes being spotted lining up on the runway. A concerned colonial player looking at the map alerted Stema landing repeatedly. Stema's defenders, however, were quite unfazed, with one of them replying, "For Stema, 9 planes is just another Tuesday," due to the heavy amount of air-to-air combat common in the region. But, unbeknownst to Stema's defenders, the massive Warden force that those planes would be escorting was already assembling, just outside of view. However, by 8:14 p.m. Central European Time, the Colonials would catch wind of the operation when a large ship was spotted in Fisherman's Row, putting Spearhead on alert. In preparation, a few Colonial fighter pilots positioned themselves at the end of the runway. 20 minutes later, 2 iron ships rammed themselves into Spearhead's western sea mines. This was followed by the Telephone Regiment's battleship being spotted by a Colonial scout plane, prompting them to plow through some more mines to begin shelling the western concrete. A cargo plane would make its escape just as the shelling began. The captain of the battleship would remark that despite being given the captain role, they were still fairly rusty after a long hiatus from combat. Combined with the smaller crew to save on server slots, they would rush their bombardment targets, striking them a minute earlier than intended, before the bombers arrived. The first 4 bombers from the Cows Regiment flew over Spearhead, but unfortunately for the Wardens, the Colonials already had a few fighters in the air. The bombers, whether by pilot error or Colonial interception, would not be able to fly in a straight line together. And given the amount of flak present on the island, the pilots were unwilling to slow down their planes to stall speed, a method commonly used to maximize their bomb drops. Not a single breach in the concrete walls was made. As the battleship continued shelling its concrete targets, the Telephone Regiment's frigate would continue shelling the runway, keeping it too damaged for any aircraft to take off or land from, on top of repeatedly killing the crews of the Colonial's central anti-air guns. With the runway down, there was only one option for launching and recovering planes on Spearhead Island. Scout planes could still technically fly, as they could take off from roads. After moving trucks and equipment out of the way, Spearhead's defenders managed to fly 2 scouts from the cramped road behind the hangar into the waiting frigate.
Scout's takeoff is better than no takeoff. Oh,
Oh my god, oh my god! Bomb it! Yes! Bomb it! Oh man.
I hit it!
After a few bombs were dropped, the frigate backed away, much to the cheers of the Colonial plane's crews.
Holy, we deterred the frigate.
You swore you were away for like 1 second.
Yeah, but
we
we-
deterred
we-
the frigate.
The battleship would also make its retreat north. Despite the celebrations, the 2 scout planes would turn out to not be the cause of the frigate retreating. The Warden fleet was regrouping for a tactical meeting with the landing ship. Given that the concrete defenses at the beaches still stood, they would decide to abandon the original plan and focus on capturing the islands around Spearhead instead. Meanwhile, on the mainland, the Gambit Coalition had a decision to make. They had previously prepared their bombers at the mainland for naval quick response force missions, given how effective heavy bombers were for attacking naval targets. However, at this time, they lacked pilots. The Coalition had 20 fighter frames available, but due to their limited number of pilots in this time zone, they only had pilots for 2 of them. This debate on whether to fly with a woefully inadequate escort likely led to the delay of their launch. The call was made to fly despite this limitation. And so, 2 fighters took off to escort their 2 bombers. Gambit intended to fly both bombers into the frigate. However, with the heavily lopsided airspace, the bomber couldn't line up with the frigate properly on their first pass. Normally, a fighter would be sent ahead of the bomber to ascertain the direction that the target was facing to guide the bomber into lining up parallel to the ship, allowing for the maximum amount of bombs to be dropped accurately. This time, they could not afford that luxury. The lead bomber holding off on dropping its payload on its first run was the first time they were unable to line up their target in a mission like this. While the lead bomber stayed on target, after seeing the massive number of fighters converging on the frigate's position, the second bomber's captain decided not to follow the lead bomber in, and broke formation, turning towards the now very open battleship. They would score 2 bombing runs on the battleship, leaving the ship in a 4 smoke damage state, meaning that it had less than 30% of its hit points left, prompting the battleship to retreat towards Fisherman's Road to the north. The bomber, however, would sustain damage to its right engine, prompting a swift retreat. The wardens would incorrectly assume that the bomber completely lost an engine, which would have forced it into the water. The Colonial bomber's crew would somehow manage to limp the plane home. Meanwhile, the lead bomber would continue attacking the frigate, finally lining up its bombing run. However, Warden fighters would destroy its left engine, forcing it to descend, slamming into the frigate before sinking into the ocean depths. Incidents such as this would lead to the crew adopting a nickname for their ship, the Flycatcher. The frigate would then return to shelling the airstrip, forcing any aircraft to refuel and rearm at the mainland instead of Spearhead. It was then that a second set of Warden bombers crossed into the region, striking the western concrete, but were unable to line up their run again, leading to the concrete's survival. It had been 24 minutes since the first shells landed, and an uneasy quiet returned to Spearhead. A quick damage assessment would reveal that the western flak guns were destroyed. The Central Airfield's anti-air battery lost both of its flak guns and one of its emplaced machine guns. They would be very quickly replaced. The artillery batteries, with the exception of the northern one, were mostly intact. The airfield would soon become operational once more. However, this was not the end of the battle. A new Warden large ship was spotted in the region, by the northwestern island called the Flare. It was around this time that a rather unorthodox weapon would come into play. The 7 HP Regiment was in possession of one of the Colonial Air Force's greatest assets. A stolen, reservable Warden torpedo bomber, taken from a freighter in transit. Normally, this plane is only exclusive to the Warden faction, and has proven to be a massive thorn in the side of the entire Colonial Navy, calling them Flying Nakis, a reference to the Warden submarine that they very quickly rendered fairly obsolete. 7 HP cobbled together parts from downed Warden planes to get it airworthy, and thus the plane was given the name El Toro. El Toro would occasionally fly sorties in Stema landing, though the plane has yet to sink any Warden large ships. But with Stema landing being full of them at the moment, the torpedo bomber would be the ideal tool to send them to the sea floor. However, 7 HP was in the middle of doing a bomber operation in the mainland. Their fighter pilots were running as escorts for the bombers. The decision was made to have 3 of those fighters turn around to act as a very light escort for this nearly unique asset in the Colonial Air Force. The torpedo bomber would join the fight. This new Warden large ship in the region was courtesy of the 300 Regiment. The crew wanted to gain experience on their new and slightly undercrewed frigate. Warden communications mentioned that a torpedo bomber was in the region, but the crew largely dismissed it, incorrectly assuming that it was a friendly torpedo bomber. The Colonials would manage to pull out a small fleet of gunboats to engage this frigate. However, that wouldn't be enough to sink it. But soon, they wouldn't be on their own. During this skirmish, El Toro would be guided in by one of its fighter escorts flying ahead of it, right into the 300 Regiment's frigate to the north of Verge Wing. El Toro would fire 2 torpedoes and land 2 hits. The crew were unable to completely seal the holes, leading to the sinking of the frigate. El Toro would then make its way back to the mainland to rearm with more torpedoes. Despite not being part of the operation and the surprise torpedo bomber, the crew had fun and this wouldn't be their last naval outing. Despite the chaos in the west, at least 3 more Warden bombers arrived at Spearhead, striking the western concrete and airstrip. Colonial fighters would chase down the lead bomber on the way out, destroying its cockpit, leading to it free-falling into the ocean. Warden fighters, of course, didn't let this go unpunished. Warden aircraft continued to harass Spearhead's airfield, ensuring that the Colonials could not get aircraft in the air to engage the landing fleet. Even the scout planes weren't spared. The Wardens prepared their invasion fleet. To the north, by the border of Fisherman's Row, the Lambda Regiment's Longhook landing ship prepared to cross into Stema Landing, but was wary of the incorrect call-out of a submarine in the area, due to the torpedoes that sank the 300 Regiment's frigate. Once it was cleared to be false information, the landing ship would be escorted by the Gods Regiment's frigate, which replaced the Telephone Regiment's frigate that was limping home with less than half of its hit points remaining. Together, they had a new objective: to capture these smaller islands in Stema Landing. Seeing the Wardens invade the flare, the Colonials on Spearhead were hesitant to redeploy, thinking that it could simply be a diversionary attack. However, with the Wardens otherwise preoccupied, a Colonial paratrooper plane from the 9th Regiment arrived on Spearhead Island. But it wasn't carrying soldiers. It was carrying 16 crates of refined metals, strictly for building more 150mm artillery guns for the island's defenses. Meanwhile, El Toro returned to engage the enemy landing fleet. However, they would fire 2 very wayward torpedoes. Originally, the pilot believed that the landing ship purposefully moved out of the way, but the ship's captain claimed to have not even seen the torpedoes. Regardless, the torpedo bomber turned around, making its way to the Spearhead airfield. As the Warden fleet moved on to the 2nd island in the chain, El Toro would taxi onto Spearhead's runway after arming 1 more torpedo. However, while they were taxiing the torpedo bomber on the ground, a Warden sea fighter flew overhead and destroyed the aircraft's tail. Knowing that they couldn't take off now, the ground crew began quickly dismantling the plane so that they could store it safely in the aircraft depot on Spearhead Island. After capturing the island of Verge Wing, the Wardens move on to the island of Eros. However, the night cargo plane returned to drop off even more supplies, including several crates of armor-piercing bombs for Colonial dive bombers. Soon, Colonial dive bombers and small fleets of gunships would engage the Warden ships, striking the landing ship and disabling a naval gun on the frigate. After losing half their hit points, the landing ship called for a retreat. Although there were a few Warden claims of at least 1 dive bomber crashing into the mast of the landing ship, with visual evidence for at least a scout plane doing so. However, Warden aircraft would continue to strafe the airfield.
Yeah, this is gonna die.
Leading to 1 dive bomber pilot hiding their plane in a nearby hangar while hoping for the best.
I'm hiding the dive bomber under the small hangar.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the airfield, the torpedo bomber's crew attempted their escape. After acquiring a spare Warden plane part from the island of Alchimio, the torpedo bomber would be assembled and once the coast was clear, made a successful retreat off the island. While the main battle was over, the Colonials weren't done yet. Multiple paratrooper planes were brought in by the Night, Navy, and Vibes regiments. They would help support pushes by smaller naval fleets to take the islands back. The Vibes regiment would spot the Warden frigate and attempted to drop paratroopers onto it. They missed their target. When the dust cleared, the Colonials managed to take back their islands. Of course though, there might have been some questionable drops along the way.
Oh no, this is not good. This is not good. Hi.
Remember, you are expendable.
However, this wouldn't be the last major naval invasion at Spearhead. I'd like to once again thank the sponsor of this video, War Thunder, which is available for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and mobile. You can sign up using the links in the pinned comment and the description of this video. New and returning players who haven't played in 6 months can also receive a massive bonus pack containing premium vehicles along with other goodies in this limited time offer. I need a nap.